Society, Stigmatize Addiction. So what is addiction? Addiction is a psychological and physical inability to stop consuming a chemical drug activity. So pretty sure everyone knows what addiction is, and probably a lot of you have had someone close to you or something that has suffered from addiction, and it obviously has like a lot of negative effects. Like I'm doing like on like drug addiction, so like hard stuff. So it can lead to all like vital organ failure, brain damage, and ultimately death. So our current addict system, so we, depending on how bad the drug charge is, you'll be placed into jail or prisons, and you'll have a misdemeanor or a felony put on your criminal record. And then you're just released, and no like further help is provided towards addicts unless you're put into like mandatory rehabilitation centers, which aren't always the most like beneficial for people. And yeah, some rehab centers can be very helpful, but there's only 11.2% of addicts out of 21 million in the United States who suffer from it annually. Only 11.2 get the help that they need. So I don't know, it kind of shows that they're not super easy to go through and get the help that you need. Pros to our current system. So some think that jails and prisons are good because people are deprived of their drug. So I guess that works because you have a place to sleep and eat, and you can't take your drug. And rehabilitation centers help a lot of people, but they also struggle to help some. And they keep like the stereotypical like drug junkies off the streets, like just people that are just out there like not really benefiting anybody, but just kind of causing more harm than good. Okay, so Portugal has a system. They decriminalized all drugs in 2001, and if you're found with a 10-day or less supply of any hard drug, you will be seen before a lawyer, judge, and a social worker, and they will decide if you should be issued a citation or be put into like a specific rehabilitation center that will be like catered to you, kind of. So they're better than just your average rehab centers. And the government will also, let's just say you want to get a job at McDonald's, the government will say like to McDonald's, if you hire this like recovering addict, we will help pay half of his wages, just so he can like get a job and maintain the job there. And Portugal had the highest drug usage rate in Europe prior to this change, and now it's 2017 statistics from Europe Monitoring Center for Drug and Drug Addiction showed Portugal had a drug-induced rate of 5.8 cases per million, which is the 5th lowest in Europe. So I don't know, it's definitely a dramatic change from 2001 to 2017, which is like a beneficial change. Pros to a new system: it would help give addicts a second chance in getting back into society, because now it's like, I don't know, if you have been suffering from addiction or whatever, people don't really recognize what, I don't know, addiction is a lot. So it's kind of a social barrier is created. And so with the new system, we could get them back in and get them a job and give them a stable community that they can be reintroduced and grow in. And America's drug usage rate would go way down, as seen with like Portugal. This is just like a cartoon. So this is kind of how society sees drug addicts. So like these two are yelling at this guy like, come on, it's not that hard, like to swim back to the top, when they're unaware that he's being weighed down by drugs and stuff. And then this is a graph that shows drug-induced deaths per million. And you can see how bad the United States is. They have 185 cases per million, which leads all other countries by quite a bit. And Portugal is pretty low. I'm gonna have a video.
They're really simple experiments. You can do them tonight when you go home if you feel a little bit sadistic. You get a rat and you put it in a cage, and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water, and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drug water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. So there you go, right? That's how we think it works. In the 70s, Professor Alexander comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. He said, we're putting the rat in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. Let's try something a bit different. So Professor Alexander built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats, right? They've got loads of cheese, they've got loads of coloured balls, they've got loads of tunnels. Crucially, they've got loads of friends, they can have loads of sex, and they've got both the water bottles, the normal water and the drugged water. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, they don't like the drugged water. They almost never use it. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. You go from almost 100% overdose when they're isolated to 0% overdose when they have happy and connected lives. Now, when he first saw this, Professor Alexander thought, maybe this is just a thing about rats, they're quite different to us, maybe not as different as we'd like, but but fortunately there was a human experiment into the exact same principle happening at the exact same time. It was called the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, 20% of all American troops were using loads of heroin. And if you look at the news reports from the time, they were really worried because they thought, my God, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war ends. It made total sense. Now, those soldiers who were using loads of heroin were followed home. The Archives of General Psychiatry did a really detailed study, and what happened to them? It turns out they didn't go to rehab. They didn't go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped. Now, if you believe the story about chemical hooks, that makes absolutely no sense. But Professor Alexander began to think there might be a different story about addiction. He said, what if addiction isn't about your chemical hooks? What if addiction is about your cage? What if addiction is an adaptation to your environment? Looking at this, there was another professor called Peter Cohen in the Netherlands who said, maybe we shouldn't even call it addiction. Maybe we should call it bonding. Human beings have a natural and innate need to bond.
So yeah, that's just a quick video, and it kind of shows that, that humans, when they're isolated, like the rats and stuff, and when they need it, or when it's all that they can rely on, and they create the bonds that humans need, they'll always choose the drugs. And so ongoing research is progressively showing that addiction is increasingly viewed as a complex disease involving maladaptive learning that exaggerates the rewarding effects of dangerous substances. So yeah, addiction isn't just a moral, the other quote says, addiction is a choice and thus a moral failing, which is how society sees it now. And many don't understand that it is a disease that alters your brain in the way that you think. And so it's created this stigma that, if you are an addict, then there's something wrong with you, or there's a choice that you made that, put you in that situation, and it's kind of easy to get back out, which it's not. So my conclusion, I believe that America should introduce a system similar to Portugal. I don't think we should decriminalize all drugs. I feel like that's a little overboard, but I think we should definitely look into better rehabilitation centers and just kind of spread more awareness about addiction, so there's not that social barrier between recovering addicts, because I've seen people come out of rehab and they just have to relapse because they don't have anybody else to talk to, they don't have anything else to do, and it's the bond that they're seeking. And those are my sources. Isaac.
What drugs to decriminalize do you think that would help our society?
I don't know if decriminalizing. I don't think we should decriminalize drugs, but maybe instead of putting people into jails or prisons that have issues with drugs, I think we should put them into specialized rehabilitation centers that will help them rather than punish them. Ellie?
So you said 11.2% of addicts get help. How come such a little percent gets help?
I'm not 100% sure why they don't. People don't want to admit that they have a problem, and there's also there's a big weight on them. If you were to admit that you have a problem, and then everyone around you just eyes are on you, and it's kind of an embarrassment. But I don't know, there's a lot of factors, but there's nothing super big.
why do you think legalizing drugs leads to less drug abuse and death?
I think, like in Portugal.
Yeah.
I don't 100% know. I guess it's like if you don't have to hide it and it's not like as big of a deal. I don't know. That was like really. I was super curious about that too because people would just stop because the drug usage rate went way down, but I'm not 100% sure like why that was. But yeah, maybe it's because if you don't have to hide it. And Austin.
So they decriminalized every single drug?
Yeah. So like everything from marijuana to like heroin was decriminalized.
Check it.